Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Draco Veritas. So, all trigger warnings apply. I do have to say that first and foremost. And for those of you that were folks that read this back in the day, you've probably noticed a lot of the changes that I've been making in order to make the story be a little bit more cohesive. So this chapter in particular is probably one of my most heavily edited. Not that the others have not been, but this one in particular, there was a lot of thinking and going, okay, I got to move this over here. This would make more sense up here. Why is this happening? Just cut this part out. And so on and so forth. So, just know that. Again, I tried to preserve as much of this as possible, but it was really, really difficult once we started getting to the end of this story. Because, Cassandra Clare had stopped writing and then had come back to it and then stopped and came back again. So it's hard to remember what you were doing when, years go in between trying to finish a fan fiction. So, without further ado, let's just get right into it. Chapter 14. Heavens are shallow. When Hermione walked into the kitchen, she found Victor sitting at the end of a long trestle table. A single candle illuminated the gloom, throwing tilting shadows against the walls and cupboards. He didn't look up when she let the door fall shut behind her, only pushed his straggling hair back and muttered something unintelligible under his breath. "Victor," Hermione said, slightly uncomfortable. "It's me." He looked up, frowning. His dark brows were drawn together over his deep-set black eyes. "How is Draco?" he asked. "Asleep for now, which is honestly the best thing for him." Hermione pulled out a chair and sat down opposite Victor. "I wanted to thank you for helping."
"I have not helped you," Victor interrupted. "I do not approve of Fleur having told you of Harry's whereabouts. I feel it is a betrayal of the trust he placed in both of us."
"He can't do this alone," Hermione said in a small voice.
"You cannot do it at all. It is an impossible task," he said.
Before Hermione could say anything, the door swung open, and Fleur came in, carrying a tray that bore a loaf of bread, a wedge of white salted cheese, a pitcher of cold milk, and a pack of Lucky Snitch cigarettes for Victor. As soon as she set it down, Hermione fell to the food, trying not to eat too ravenously and make a spectacle of herself. Victor ate more slowly. He pulled the bread apart and dunked the crusts in his milk until they practically dissolved. Then he said something loudly to Fleur in what sounded like a sputtering mixture of Bulgarian and French. Fleur replied to him soothingly and laid a hand on his arm, and he returned his attention back to Hermione.
"If you must know Harry's whereabouts, he is at my apartment in Prague," Victor said. "He will be safe there. Well, as long as he doesn't go out at night. I intended to meet with him tomorrow and bring him some of my friends from the Resistance with me, for backup."
Hermione started. "What do you mean, as long as he doesn't go out at night?" she demanded. Victor's dark eyes narrowed.
"Hermione, do you really not know?" he asked. "I would have expected you to at least—"
He broke off and shrugged.
"The situation here is not what it is in England. We are not protected by our ministry as you are. You know whose control has been steadily spreading these past months. His minions walk the streets freely at night. Many are vampire, the undead.
Vampires? Hermione whispered. You mean you sent Harry somewhere where there are vampires?
It was the safest place I could think of, Victor said. He wanted to go, and there are not many, I think, who could make Harry Potter do anything he does not want to do.
Hermione opened her mouth to reply, then shut it. He was right, of course. Even she hadn't been able to make him stay.
Perhaps you should come with me tomorrow to join, Harry, said Victor.
Why not now? Said a voice from the doorway, and they all turned to see Draco. He was standing upright, looking slightly pale, but overall better than he had been.
You wish to go now?
Victor asked. I wouldn't have said so if I didn't, replied the other boy. Victor regarded him for a long moment, then said finally,
Very well. We have, all of us, more important things to think about, and I have no desire to fight over the best dispensation of energies. I must gather my colleagues and ready them. Do what you like.
Fleur stood up. Shall I give them the portkey, Victor? He nodded.
I see no way around it.
Hermione flew around the table and hugged him. Thank you, Victor. Seemingly gratified, he returned her embrace. He still smelled the way he had when he was 18, like cigarette smoke and black pepper and wool sweaters. He patted Hermione on the back. Draco cleared his throat. Hermione, sometime in the next century, please. Detaching herself, Hermione went over to where Draco was standing next to Fleur. Was there a really pressing need to apply yourself to him like a coat of glue? He muttered. Hermione allowed herself a small smile. Jealous? Shut up, Granger. I do not understand your relationship, Fleur said gloomily, glancing from Draco to Hermione and back again. That makes three of us, said Draco, and Hermione did not contradict him. The portkey deposited Hermione and Draco in the anteroom of a large, well-appointed flat in the middle of Prague. The walls were white, hung with colorful paintings, and down the long hallway Draco could see doors leading off to various rooms. There appeared to be a kitchen at the end of the hallway, if the checkerboard linoleum was anything to go by. Several shaded lamps had been left burning, and on a peg near the table hung a dark red jumper. The cuffs of its sleeves frayed and pulled out of shape. Hermione reached out and put her hand against it. He's here, she said. Yes, Draco agreed, but he's not in the flat. I can tell. He began walking down the corridor anyway, his stomach nodding and feeling as if he were going to throw up. He wasn't sure what he was more afraid of, that Harry wasn't here, or that he was. Well, is he nearby? I don't know. Draco stopped and peered into what looked like the living room. A low fire burned in the grate of a large marble fireplace, elegantly carved with a pattern of leaves. A wing-back chair was drawn up to it, and there was a plush-looking sofa with a low table. Other than the fire, the place appeared untouched. Didn't Victor say he wasn't supposed to go out after dark? Hermione fretted in a worried tone. It's not quite dark yet, Draco said, looking pointedly out the window, where the sky was darkening to sapphire. Hermione turned to look as well. She could see the angled roofs of the nearby buildings, the gabled windows hung with colorful curtains. Soon, the lighting charms would go on, and the sky would darken, and Harry would come into the apartment, shutting the door behind him, opening his mouth in surprise when he saw them there. She turned away from the window and saw Draco also staring outside with an odd expression on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, and Draco seemed to come to, shaking himself out of deep thought. "It's nothing," he said. "I'm going into the other room to wait for him." Hermione looked after him in surprise, but before she could inquire further, he had walked into the living room and plopped himself down in the armchair. Standing alone in the foyer now, she realized that she was desperate for a change of clothes. Fleur had promised to make sure that the hotel sent their bags on from Diagon Alley to Victor's apartment, but in the interim, she couldn't help feeling miserable and dirty from the ash caked under her shirt where Victor had pulled her through the fire. With a sigh, she glanced at herself in the mirror by the door to see how terrible she looked. Her hair, of course, was escaping from its braids already. She tugged it free and ran a hand through the tangles before giving up and wandering into the living room. "Harry isn't back," she said pointedly. "I know," he said, his voice sounding muffled. She went over to the fire and sat down opposite him. Feeling very nervous all of a sudden, Hermione reached out and took his hand. He let her. "I'm sorry about what I said to you in your father's office," she said suddenly. "You know, about you being reckless. It was pointless and mean." "You shouldn't apologize for saying things that are true," he said. "I know, but I'm feeling bitter," she said, and Draco's eyes changed from distant to surprised. "But I'm also trying not to dwell on it." She sighed. "Sometimes I feel that I've been wrong or foolish for loving him, or that my loving him was a mistake. We don't love people because they deserve it. In the end, what's important is what that love says about us, that we're capable of loving someone like that. Most people aren't capable of 1/10 of that kind of real love, 100th of it. Most people would be terrified of it if they could even imagine it." He didn't reply. In fact, he had gone suddenly rigid all over and glanced back at the window. "Harry," he said, slipping his hand out of hers and bolting to his feet before they both heard the door opening, then closing shut. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Hermione also scrambled to her feet, and both of them tore out into the open foyer. At the sound of movement within the flat, Harry turned from the door in astonishment, one hand flung out. But as soon as he saw Draco come around the corner, he froze. For a moment, neither of the boys moved. Harry stared. "Malfoy?" Draco smiled tensely. "Try to contain your joy at seeing me, Potter. It's embarrassing." Harry blinked at him. "Where's Hermione?" he said. "I'm right here," Hermione said as she too came around the corner. "So, Victor told you where I was," Harry said, feeling distantly annoyed. "It was Fleur, actually," Draco corrected. "I told her not to tell you," Harry said. "And Victor told you not to stay out too late," Hermione admonished. "Don't," Harry said miserably. "I'm not angry, and I don't want to fight." "That's very gracious of you." Draco's voice was carefully neutral. He lifted his face so that the shadows fell across his eyes, and it looked almost as if he were wearing a mask. "Why did you come after me again?" Harry asked. "Why wouldn't we?" Draco returned, sounding perfectly calm, perfectly reasonable. Harry tried in vain to reach out and feel what Draco was thinking, but it was like having his face pressed to a glass so darkly tinted that it obscured everything happening on the other side. Harry blinked at him.
You don't need to be all proud around me.
No, Draco said. I think you've made it quite clear that you have no use for us. And right now it's taking a great deal of effort for me not to hit you in the head with something.
Harry blinked again. How much effort, exactly?
Too much, Draco said, and in one swift movement, he stepped forward and swung his arm up, hard, hitting Harry in the face. He dropped like a rock, out cold. There was a little gasp from behind him, and Draco turned to look at Hermione. "I can't believe you hit him," she said.
"I had to knock him out, or he probably would have run away again."
His voice was quite calm, and the incredulous, almost amused look in his eyes made her feel faintly nervous. "Well, let's put him in the bedroom at least." Draco nodded and went to grab Harry's feet.
"Good idea. If we leave him too long in the foyer, he'll definitely run away for sure."
Waking up was like having two very long, very thin needles jammed into his temples, just behind his eyes. Harry moaned, his eyelids fluttering wide and then squeezing shut again in protest as agonizing light sliced into his eyeballs. He tried to cover them with his hands, but something seemed to be preventing him.
"Welcome back to the land of the living,"
said a familiar voice. Draco.
"Does the light bother you?"
"Yes," Harry said, and winced again.
"Sucks to be you, then,"
Draco said, rather without feeling. Very slowly, Harry pried his eyes open. He was lying on his back in the bed of Victor's apartment. Draco sat beside him, idly playing with the black seal ring on his left hand. Looking down at himself, Harry now realized why neither of his arms or legs seemed to be working. It was because his hands were tied to the ornate headboard, while ropes secured his ankles. Forgetting the pain in his head, he jerked violently against his restraints, with little result. "What the hell, Malfoy?" he yelped. "Did you tie me up?"
"Not exactly,"
Draco said, with a beatific smile, giving the ring on his finger a final spin, and turned to look at Harry.
"Hermione helped."
"Why?" was all Harry managed.
"Because we're tired of chasing you round Europe, Potter," Draco said. "You're a flight risk. Short of handcuffing myself to your leg, I see no other way to assure myself that you stay put until we decide what to do with you."
Harry's right wrist jerked in the loop of rope that held it. "Where is Hermione?" Draco shrugged elegantly.
"You're the one tied up," he said. "Shouldn't I be asking you questions?"
Harry gave up the idea of struggling and lay back on the bed. "Look," he said, "I know you're upset with me. I know what I did was—"
"Shut up,"
Draco said. His expression hadn't changed, and neither had his inflection, but there was something in his voice that made Harry stare. Draco, however, continued to regard him with the same look of faint, bland amusement. "I can't believe you hit me," Harry said, the inability to stay silent weighing on him. "Yes," Draco said. "Your eye is turning a beautiful shade, by the way. It's kind of red and yellow and maroon around the edges. Looks like you bruise in Gryffindor colors." Harry felt all his muscles tighten as he tried to think of a response to this, but was saved the trouble by the sound of the door opening, and Hermione came into the room carrying a silver flask. Harry stared. She looked the same, and yet somehow different. Her face looked thinner, her skin translucently pale. Her soft mouth tensed with uncertainty as she looked at him, and her dark eyes went very wide, then very soft. "Harry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Draco looked from one of them to the other as they stared at each other, his mouth set in a bitter line. "I'll be going," he said. That snapped Hermione out of her daze. "Draco," she said, and held out her hand to him with the silver flask in it. "Take this, please, and don't leave. At least, not yet," she pleaded. Draco got up from the chair he had been sitting in without looking at Harry, and went over to Hermione and allowed her to press the flask into his hand. She said something very quietly to him that Harry couldn't hear, and couldn't tell anything from Draco's response. He was shaking his head, and had half turned away when Hermione caught at his arm and pulled him back. There was something about the way she did it, the familiarity of the gesture, or her need to keep him there, or the way that Draco let her do it, that annoyed Harry. He bit down, clenching his fists. "I deserve this," he thought. "I have no right at all." Hermione dropped her hand from Draco's arm. He looked at her and didn't smile. Then he popped the cork on the flask and took a swig, his whole body giving a shudder that made Harry's stomach flip. He opened his mouth to ask, but Hermione had turned to look at him, and that made him feel even worse. He didn't move as she approached the bed. Obviously, he really couldn't move very far at all. Draco had secured his wrists tightly to each side of the headboard. It looked to be an uncomfortable position, if not actually painful. Harry raised his head as she came near and sat down facing him. A deep bruise flowered out from a welt just above his right eye. "Does it hurt?" Hermione said, fighting the urge to reach out and touch his face. "Yes," Harry said. There was tension in the set of his mouth, and his tone was guarded. "Hermione, could you—" "Not unless you swear that you won't run away." Harry looked momentarily indignant, but then said, "I swear." Draco harumphed at that, but Hermione lifted her wand, pointed, and the rope sprang apart, and Harry's hands fell into his lap. He chafed his wrists, his eyes downcast, and said guardedly, "Are you going to scold me?" There was a short silence while Hermione considered. "No," she said finally, "I'm not." Harry looked as if she had taken the wind out of his stubbornness. "So, you're not angry?" "Of course I'm angry," Hermione said hopelessly. "You run off and leave us? You put yourself in danger?" "No, He winced and broke off. "My ankles," he said. "Oh, I'll get them," Hermione said, and touched her wand to the ropes at his feet. "Oh, sure. Just undo all my hard work," muttered Draco from the corner. He was looking at them both with an expression of bland distaste. The ropes fell away, and when Hermione looked up, he was leaning back against the headboard, rubbing his wrists again and looking at her ruefully. "Do you hate me?" he said. "Is that what this is about?" "We hate what you did, Harry," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I hate that you left me. I hate what you did to Draco. And if you think that I'm going to let you leave here without us, you're out of your mind. I don't care what fantasy you've got in your head about saving the world single-handedly." "I don't want to leave here without you," he said in a low voice. Hermione stared at him. She would have thought he was lying, but Harry didn't lie. Not the way that Draco didn't lie. Harry didn't lie because he couldn't. He sat looking at his hands, clasping the blanket, plying the fabric nervously between his fingers. "I was wrong to leave without you," he said, and glanced briefly at Draco. "Both of you. I see that now. I've been pushing you all away, because I thought I couldn't possibly ask you to come with me. I thought it would be the most supreme kind of selfishness to drag you two along on a quest that was mine. It's my death Voldemort wants, after all. It always has been. Harry, don't. Harry's hands shook on the blanket, but his voice was steady. Let me finish. I'm telling you what I thought, not what I think now. Draco, you kept trying to tell me, but I don't think I ever really listened. He said, you said that I was a hero, and that I was going to have to make a hero's choice. I thought you were mocking me, the way you always do. Hell, the way you always did. Calling me Saint Potter and all that. But I realized, after I left, that you meant it. You were trying to tell me that being a hero was hard and brutal and even demeaning. That it isn't glorious. That it isn't all these ugly choices you make day after day, every day. You were trying to tell me that you don't get the luxury of sparing your friends pain. You have to choose the world and not everything else. Pretty sentiment, Potter, said Draco coldly. There was a hard, unpleasant flatness in his grey eyes, and when he crossed his arms over his chest, he looked more stubborn than ever. But if you think that absolves you and earns my forgiveness, you've got another thing coming, because I won't ever forgive you for it. Ever. More alarmed than bewildered, Harry stared. I don't understand, he said. Draco, said Hermione impatiently, please, just let him finish. She turned back to Harry. Go on. Harry swallowed. When I left, I was trying to keep the people I couldn't stand seeing hurt from being hurt. But that's not choosing the world. That's choosing myself and what I love and can't bear to be without. The truth is, if I really want to defeat Voldemort, I need you both, and I never meant to hurt either of you. Then why did you write all those horrible things in that letter to Draco? Hermione demanded. Hermione, said Draco, his tone sharp and icy, do me a favor, and don't ever mention that letter again, especially not to him. You don't get to make that call, Hermione snapped. I was the one who found it first, so don't tell me what can and cannot be discussed right now. During all this, Harry's head jerked up, and he stared at them. Astonishment seared across his features. You read it? He asked. Of course I did, said Hermione. At first I couldn't believe you'd written it at all. Some small part of her wanted to remind him that he had not written her a letter, but pride stopped her. Ginny had to do a spell to prove it. Harry's hands had fisted themselves in the blanket. His knuckles were white. I know I'm not very good at letter writing, he began, a little unsteadily. I was trying to be honest. I can barely even remember what I said now. It's all blurred together. But if Draco doesn't want to talk about it, I won't mention it again. Good, said Draco. Glad we understand each other. He dropped his hand back to his side, tightening the fingers into a fist, and Harry saw the ugly welts along his palm. But before he could ask, Hermione spoke. Well, maybe I want to talk about it, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. That letter was... Look, I'm sorry, okay? Harry half shouted, squeezing his eyes shut, seeming unable to stop himself. I'm not perfect, Hermione. I'm selfish sometimes, and I do bloody stupid things, and I hate. You wouldn't believe how I can hate. I think ugly, brutal, horrible thoughts, all the time. If you knew the half of it, what I'm really like. He broke off, his voice ragged and desperate. Hermione gaped at him. She was too stunned to even begin teasing out all the threads of what was true from what was rage and confusion in what he had just said. Even Draco had gone still. "Remember that time in 3rd year when you told Ron I didn't want to kill anyone? You were wrong. I want to kill Voldemort. And if I could get my hands on Draco's bloody father, I'd kill him too." He took a deep, shuddering breath, a sound like a sob whipsawing its way out of his lungs. "You'll never understand," he continued despairingly. "You've always seen my better self, Hermione, and I wanted to be that for you so badly. But I don't think my best self has much of a chance against Voldemort. I just don't." "Is this what you couldn't tell me?" she whispered. "What you've been hiding from me all this time?" "Yes," he said. He had raised his face a little, his teeth biting down into his lip. There was a pause. "I'm sorry you thought I wanted you to be perfect," Hermione said at last, "or anything other than what you are. Draco's right. You're a hero, and that means you're forced into positions where there are no right choices. I love you, Harry. Nothing changes that. I've loved you since I met you, and I'll love you even if I never see you again." "So, you're not angry?" he asked. "No," she said, and looked over at Draco. From this vantage point, the other boy's face was in shadow. She could see him only in shades of light hair and pale skin and dark clothes. Suddenly, his nose wrinkled. "Something smells like it's burning," he said. Hermione leapt to her feet. "Oh no! I forgot about the pot on the stove!" she said, and ran for the door. Both boys looked after her, each feeling stunned before looking back at each other. Draco looked away first. After a moment, Harry asked, "Are you still furious with me?" "Yes," said the other boy shortly. "I know you think that you can tell Hermione some long-winded story about heroism and work me into the mix so that you don't have to feel guilty about what you did. Would it help if I said that leaving Hogwarts like that was the biggest mistake I ever made?" "Not really," Draco said. "But you're not the first to make an imbecilic misjudgment, and I'm sure you'll make an even bigger, better mistake in the future." Harry winced, but pressed on regardless. "I didn't want to leave," he said. "Snape told me I had to." "Snape?" Draco repeated, incredulous. "Since when do you listen to what he says?" "Look, I'm just telling you what happened," said Harry. "And anyway, Voldemort is my problem, not yours." "Your problem?" Draco's voice was blood and honey, metallic and deceptively sweet. He laughed then, but the sound wasn't happy. "You really don't know what's going on, do you, Potter?" The strangest of Draco's words stumped Harry, and for a moment he was too shocked to say anything. He simply stared, as Draco, looking away from him, seemed to be fighting for control, although over what emotion, Harry could barely guess. "What does that mean?" he asked quietly. The grey eyes, as they regarded the empty air in front of him, were supremely calm, icy, as the next words seemed to be chosen very carefully. "When Hermione comes back, then we'll tell you. Until then, I really don't feel like talking to you anymore." Harry waited for him to go on, but Draco had gone silent, and there was only the faint sound of the wind coming from outside, and the shadows lengthening on the floor between Harry and the other boy. Over the sound of the wind, Harry became aware of a faint whispering noise, and realized that it had started to rain. When Hermione got out into the corridor, it was half full of black smoke, and by the time she arrived in the kitchen to flip the stove off, she was cursing herself under her breath. Where the pot had boiled over, black fluid had pooled all around the base of the stove, and the ingredients inside the pot were charred and unusable. "I should have checked this sooner," Hermione lamented and made a face, snapping up a dish towel. As she dried her hands, she listened for sounds coming from the bedroom. She expected to hear the low rumble of conversation, or even voices raised in consternation. But there was nothing except the sound of the rain as it started to fall outside. Perhaps they were sulking? Perhaps they'd made up and were chatting in a happy telepathic silence? Perhaps they'd ripped down the curtain rods and beaten each other to death with them? Where Harry and Draco were concerned, anything was possible. She shook herself. Who cares what they are up to? I can't always be the one to make them see reason. Sighing, she finished cleaning up the rest of the sticky mess, then decided that Prague might be just the place to find fresh ingredients for the antidote. And since her backup batch was now ruined, now might be the only time she would get to go and look for them. The sun hadn't quite set yet, so she should be perfectly safe. She went to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. The last red streaks of sunlight were fading out of the sky that was heavy with clouds and softly falling rain. The lamps all up and down the street were lighting themselves, casting shallow pools at intervals along the deserted pavement. As Hermione's foot hit the last step of the street, she paused. A moment before, the pavement in front of Victor's door had been deserted. Now, she could see a group of dark figures so closely huddled together that Hermione could not immediately tell how many of them there were. She knew, without knowing how she knew, that they were aware of her, and that they were not friendly. As she stared, one of the figures detached itself from the group. Hermione caught the impression of someone tall, wearing a long dark robe. A man with long black hair and a stark white face was suddenly standing before her. His deep-socketed eyes glittered black and devilish under the faint lamplight, and he was smiling, revealing two canines as long and sharp as the points of daggers. "Well, well," he said, his voice softly accented. "If it isn't Harry Potter's girlfriend, how very nice to make your acquaintance." "You're a vampire," Hermione said. She recognized that this was information the stranger already possessed, but it seemed worth noting. She had never seen an actual vampire before, only the photographs Lupin had shown them in DADA class. He looked exactly like an illustration from her Understanding the Undead textbook. "Yes, I am," said the vampire, and cocked his head to one side. "You are rather small," he said, "smaller than I thought you would be. And I have no plans to drink your blood, unless, of course, you force my hand." "Come near me, and it'll be the last thing you do," she said, but could hear the tremor in her own voice. The vampire smiled, and the razor teeth gleamed in the lamplight. "You should know that the Dark Lord sent us for you," he said, and took a step forward. The other vampires followed, their faces hidden beneath their hoods, but Hermione caught the flash of fangs as they smiled and began to move towards her. Hermione turned quickly on her heel and was up the stairs in a shot. She fumbled for the knob of the door, but suddenly there were hands on her arms, jerking her off her feet. A hand clapped over her mouth, cutting off her scream. She bit at the fingers, but it was too late. Something like the smell of heavy perfume began to waft up from the cloak of the vampire, and the world tilted into a kaleidoscope of shapes and colors before fading entirely to black. The sound of the front door closing drew Harry's attention. "Did Hermione just leave?" he asked. "Sounds like it," Draco said ungraciously. Furrowing his brow, Harry got slowly to his feet and crossed the room, feeling strangely disquieted. He moved into the outer room, and after a moment of startled hesitation, Draco followed him. He found Harry in the kitchen, standing in front of the sink, looking down at the dishes Hermione had piled therein. Draco paused by the stove and looked down at it. Whatever had been in the pot was now a blackened and unrecognizable mass. He looked up at Harry, and both seemed to come to the same conclusion simultaneously. Night had already fallen, and Hermione had gone outside. Victor's warning echoed like an unspoken weight between them, and several things happened after that in quick succession. Harry's eyes went almost impossibly wide, and his mouth dropped open. Draco had never seen him look like that, and in another situation he would probably have found it funny. He didn't now, and felt his own face pale in astonishment and dawning incredulity. "Where is she?" he whispered, but before Harry had a chance to respond, Draco had rushed to the door and threw it open. Outside, night was beginning to settle in, and the front step was empty. Hermione was gone. Harry could feel it the second Draco turned back around, could feel the lack of her like its own presence. "What happened?" he demanded. "Where is she?" "I think someone must have taken her," Draco said, his voice hollow. "Voldemort's men. The ones Victor warned us about. What will they do to her?" Harry asked, sounding almost panicked. "I honestly don't think they'll do anything to her," Draco said. "How can you be so sure?" Harry continued bitterly. Draco said nothing for a moment. He stared down at the pot, at whatever it had once contained, burnt now to ash. "Because I know that Ron would never allow that to happen." When at last Hermione regained consciousness, the first thing she did was open her eyes. This turned out to be a mistake. She was 200 feet above the ground, racing along at incredible speed, with no visible means of support. Seeing this, she promptly fainted again. The second time she opened her eyes, she was above mountains. This time, though her stomach lurched with nausea and her mind reeled with terror, she remained conscious. Her first thought was that she was on an invisible flying carpet, but then she felt nothing supporting her. Instead, she was dangling like a kitten by the scruff of its neck. Slowly, she craned her head around and looked up. It was difficult, with her hair whipping in her face, but she had been right. There was someone holding her. A man with long dark hair and a thin, cruel face. He bent his lips to her ear. "So, you are awake at last, little witch," he hissed. Breath had finally come back into her lungs, and with it, cold panic. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" "I am Gabriel," he said. "I serve he who rules the shadows." "You mean Voldemort," Hermione said. Gabriel made a dismissive gesture with his other hand, the one not holding onto her waist. "As you like," he murmured. Hermione shivered. It was freezing up here, and she was wearing only a thin sweater and a pair of jeans. "What does he want with me?" Gabriel shrugged. I don't much know or care, he admitted candidly. Hermione glared. Harry will find me, and when he does, he will destroy you and all of Voldemort's filthy minions. For a moment, she thought she saw Gabriel's lips tighten, but then he merely smiled, his long canines showing stark white against his two red lips. Nonsense, he murmured, his tone caressing. Do not imagine that such a thing is possible, little witch. It will only serve to make you sad when the Dark Lord destroys the boy who lived. Harry was sitting on the edge of the bed, head bent, hands between his knees. For a moment, after Draco's odd pronouncement, he had just sat where he was, very still. But as Draco began to explain the horrible event that had taken place, the ritual, Ron, the terrible knowledge that he was now possessed by Voldemort, he began to shake and had had to take several deep breaths in order to steady himself. After several moments, Draco had come over and sat down next to him. Sorry I had to be the one to tell you all of this, he said in a strangely soft voice. In response, Harry just shook his head. It's fine, he admitted. There was another long pause before Harry had the strength to raise his head once more. What do we do now? He asked, looking more lost than Draco had ever seen him look. Well, he began, I think our best bet is to go after Hermione. And when we find her, what do we do about Ron? Draco looked at him, and the anger that had been churning in the pit of his stomach for the past hour and a half slowly began to temper. I don't know, he replied truthfully. But I do know that we aren't doing Hermione any favors by sitting around here. We need to get to Romania, and fast. And I think I know just how to do it. How? Don't ask questions and just follow me, Potter. Feeling numb, Harry obeyed and followed Draco out into the hallway, where he watched the other boy until he found the hatch that led up a flight of narrow steps that eventually took them to the roof. Draco popped the secondary hatch and climbed out, Harry following right behind him. Walking to the edge of the roof, he looked over the side and considered the distance to the next house. His black clothes blended in with the darkness, but his pale hair and face were marked out very clearly against the dark sky. Harry looked up. The stars were out overhead, dim and irregular sequins that cast just enough light for him to clearly see the village as it stretched out in all directions. He looked back at Draco and saw that he was kneeling down at the roof's edge, fiddling with something Harry couldn't see. Suddenly, he stood up abruptly, ran along the wall, then leapt back down onto the roof and strode over to where Harry was standing. In his hands, he held something small, and Harry could make out the shape of feathers in between his fingers. Drawing aside his cloak, he hooked a hand into his belt and stared down thoughtfully. Have you got a knife on you, Potter? He asked. I've got my pocket knife, said Harry, looking wary. Great, said Draco. Now give it to me. Feeling his apprehension growing by the second, Harry drew it out from the inside of his robes and threw it to Draco, who caught it neatly out of the air, then opened his palm, and he could see the shape of a dead pigeon lying there. Slowly, Draco took the knife and sliced through the soft flesh of the bird, and the blood came freely, black and deep red. Harry arched his eyebrow. What are you doing? We need blood, Draco said, preferably the blood of the dead. Why do we need Thestrals? Draco said, his mouth curled into a satisfied smile. Oh, said Harry, then looked around. What if there aren't any within the vicinity? I'm sure there must be, Draco replied, sounding confident. They don't tend to stray too far from wizarding villages, but we might have to wait a moment for the wind to catch the scent. How long will that take? I haven't a clue, Potter, Draco said. He didn't sound irritated as much as he sounded tired. Without knowing what else to do, Harry leaned against a brick chimney and tried to assume a patient posture. Draco, on the other hand, looked thoughtfully up at the sky. Are there stars? He asked. Harry was startled for a moment before replying, Of course there are stars. He stared hard at Draco, mystified, but he was staring resolutely at the sky. There was a long silence, one stretched out between them like pulled taffy. A thought suddenly occurred to Harry, and he opened his mouth to ask the question before he could stop himself. So, do you love her? He asked. Draco whipped his head around and blinked unfocused eyes at the other boy. Who? Ginny, Harry said with emphasis. There was another long silence, but this one was taut. What's it to you, Potter? Draco said finally. I'm just curious, that's all. Draco turned his head towards Harry so that the moonlight washed his eyes out, turned them white and blind. I want to be able to love her, he said. I think it would make me happy, but I also think that perhaps it's not in my nature to be happy. Happiness is simple after all, and I've never liked anything simple. He paused then and looked back up at the sky. Happiness is so simple for you, he continued quietly after a moment. You know who you love, at least. There was another silence, as Harry tried to puzzle out what Draco meant. How could anyone not know who they loved? Love was like pain. You knew when you felt it, just like you knew when you stepped on a carpet tack. If you mean Hermione, Harry said, it's like I said in the letter I wrote to her when I left Hogwarts. I've always... He broke off then, not because Draco had made any noise to interrupt him, but because Draco had somehow interrupted him with his silence. He had felt the explosion of something inside Draco, a burst of bright realization, followed by a sudden, terrible tension. What letter to Hermione? Draco said, his eyes gone very wide, his mouth half open. Harry stiffened and stared at Draco. What do you mean? Look, I know you said you didn't want to talk about the letters, but... Letter! Draco interrupted. His tone was cold and precise. Not letters. I didn't say anything about not wanting to talk about any letters you may or may not have written to people other than me. He was alert now, poised on the balls of his feet, like a cat ready to pounce. His eyes were feverishly bright. You say you wrote Hermione a letter? When? What did you do with it? Where did you leave it? With yours, Harry said stiffly. Color was coming and going in Draco's face in bright, shifting tides. And what did it say? I don't think I should tell you that, Harry said, feeling bewildered and embarrassed all at the same moment. That letter was for Hermione. If she didn't show it to you, she must have had her reasons. She had a reason, Draco said quietly. You never wrote her one, Potter. Of course I wrote one, Harry replied, stunned. I wouldn't lie about a thing like that. Draco laughed unpleasantly, a sound of bitter amazement. You don't get it, do you? He said. You and your letters. All your lies about loyalty and friendship and caring about people and all that. It's just words to you, isn't it? And whatever friendship we had, it was nothing to you. Just one drop in the ocean of how much everyone loves you. Nothing special, nothing different, nothing you couldn't do without. Harry stared, uncomprehending. How can you say that? How can you even think that for 1 second? Draco was breathing hard, his cheeks flushed scarlet despite the cold. Because it's what you said in your letter to me. What? I would never say that. Not ever. In response, Draco took out a much creased, much folded, and worn to the point of translucency piece of parchment out of his robes, and slammed it up against Harry's chest. If you forgot what you said, go ahead and read it. Read it right now. Stunned beyond words, Harry took the letter and read it over once, then twice, then a third time. When he was done, he held it out to Draco, feeling sick. I didn't write this, he said. Draco didn't make a move to take it back. Of course you did, he said. No, Harry said. I didn't. Ginny enchanted the letter, Potter, Draco said, to identify who had written it. It identified you. His voice was flat, almost effectless. But Harry could see the drumbeat of a pulse at the base of Draco's throat, the grim tightness to his lips. I didn't write that letter, he said, throwing all his strength into it. All the force of his own desperation gathered to break down the barriers inside Draco's head. I can't lie to you with my thoughts. You told me that yourself. Stop it! Draco reeled back as if Harry had hit him, the look on his face halfway between astonishment and anger. I told you to stay out of my head! I would never have said any of those things. I don't think a single one of them are true. You know what the real letter said? What I really wrote? Do you want to know? Draco froze. He was still looking away from Harry, but at least he no longer seemed to be fleeing. Shivering, he drew the ragged edges of his cloak closer around him. His eyes looked very dark in his face, as if they had drunk up the sky's indigo, and it had turned them black. No, he said wonderingly, and for once there was no artifice in his voice, and no distance. I don't need to hear it, Harry. He paused for a moment, then said, You must have wondered why I was so angry after I read it. I did, Harry said, then stared down at the letter. But now that I know, can we tear this up? He said, and held the letter out, though Draco didn't take it, just stared at it. There was a look on his face Harry recognized. He'd seen it on Fred and George's faces when he had handed them that bag of gold at the end of fourth year. He'd seen it on Hermione's face when she'd realized he hadn't died in the bottomless pit outside Malfoy Manor. It was a look of bewildered gratitude. You really didn't write it, he said. Of course I didn't write it, Harry said, suddenly weary of the whole thing. And what could have possessed you to think that I had? You left, Draco said, very quietly and without accusation. But it stopped Harry in his tracks. You said you weren't going to leave, but you did, without even telling us where you were going. I couldn't take you with me, Harry said. You were ill. You could hardly walk then. Draco's eyes darkened. I'm walking now, aren't I? Well, yes, Harry said, but that's because of Snape's cure. A faint wash of color spread across Draco's face. For some reason, it reminded Harry of the time Hermione had slapped him, and the red mark of her hand had stayed on his cheek for several minutes. "Cured," he said, sounding almost amused. "Yes," Harry said. "Before I left, I heard Snape and Dumbledore talking after you fell asleep. They were talking about the antidote." But he couldn't go on, as Draco was looking at him with an odd steadiness. "Look, Harry," he began, but broke off as a high cry split the night. Harry's head jerked up, and Draco's gaze followed his. The dusky sky was heavy with the clear brass light of the moon, and they both saw a wheeling shape, dark and winged, growing larger and larger, angling down towards the roof. They landed with a soft, susurrating beat of leathery wings, then went still. There were two of them, and their fleshless black hide clung to their protruding skeleton. The eyes regarding them were as white as smoke. Wordlessly, Draco held a hand out to the beast, and the Thestral gazed at him steadily for a moment before lowering its head and brushing the back of his hand with its muzzle. "I didn't know you could see Thestrals, Malfoy," Harry said. Draco shot him a sideways look. "I've been dead, remember?" He dropped his hand, but the Thestral continued to nuzzle his shoulder. It was the closest thing to any kind of affectionate gesture Harry could imagine one of the death horses making. "After that, I started seeing them around the school grounds. They tended to follow me. I think they just like anything related to death." A shiver ran down Harry's bones. "I've never ridden one before. Have you?" To his surprise, Draco paled slightly. "No," he said, displaying a sudden and surprising hesitation. "I can, but I don't like riding horses if I can help it." "If you don't like riding horses," Harry said, "how are we supposed to get off this roof?" Draco gave him a supremely annoyed look, but Harry ignored it. "I said I didn't like it. I didn't say I wouldn't do it." "Fine," Harry said, and reaching up, he fisted one hand in the Thestral's tangled mane and pulled himself up onto its back. It danced forward a few steps, then relaxed. Draco proceeded to clamber up on the other Thestral. It made a sound low in its throat, leathery wings rustling. Harry watched him settle in before leaning forward and whispering into the Thestral's ear. "Take us," he said, "to Voldemort." The Thestral's legs bunched beneath it, and both launched themselves skyward. Together they sped up into the ink-blot of a sky, the world spinning away beneath them, a glowing carpet of lights that gradually faded to an indistinct blur. And that is all for this chapter, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're new to the channel, hello, welcome. Like, comment, subscribe if you have not. And I have a Ko-fi and a Patreon that are linked here in my About section on YouTube. I do have monthly videos that I produce and put up on my Patreon every month at the higher tiers there. Is it at the $1 tier? No, it's the $2 tier. That's the one. The $2 tier, you would get to see those. So yes, if you are interested in supporting me monetarily, you can go to those places. Other than that, thank you guys so much again, and I will see you all in the next one. Good night.